An unconscious Daryl drifts across the Atlantic on a small boat. He wakes up with a "Where am I? Who am I?" look on his face. On a completely unfamiliar street, he discovers signs written in French everywhere. He finds an abandoned yacht, grabs a bottle of water, and chugs it down. He roasted a fish, got some sleep, and after gathering some resources and weapons, Daryl records a message for himself, stating that he's from the Commonwealth in America. If he doesn't make it home alive, please tell them I tried. This, of course, refers to the search for Rick. Next scene, Daryl travels alone over mountains and ridges, eventually arriving at an abandoned factory. Like everywhere else, the factory hides many dormant walkers. Hearing a noise, they immediately wake up and attack the living. For a seasoned veteran like Daryl, this should have been a piece of cake. But unexpectedly, the blood of these walkers is corrosive. One of the walkers reaches out and grabs him, instantly dissolving a layer of his skin. This leaves even the old pro Daryl stunned. It seems that with France as the origin of the virus, the variety of variant walkers is bound to be greater than in America. After a simple bandaging of his wound, Daryl continues onward. He finally sees living people. This pair, one old and one young, doesn't seem like a threat, but he remains vigilant, because he knows well the principle that the living are more terrifying than the dead. One wrong move, and he might get captured and eaten again. It turns out his caution was not misplaced. 2 soldiers appear shortly after. They don't come in peace. They seem to be planning to do something bad to the old and young pair. Seeing this, Daryl steps in to help and almost loses his life. But who would have thought the girl would turn around and knock him out cold just to steal some of his supplies? This once again proves the immutable law of the apocalypse. You can't be a good person. Waking up from unconsciousness, Daryl finds himself rescued by another group of people. This group of nuns, without a word, immediately presses a searing hot piece of metal on his wound. The next morning, a nun named Isabel briefly introduces herself and then provides a lengthy expositional dialogue. First, the walkers Daryl encountered earlier are called burners here. They are different from the usual slow-moving walkers and have different characteristics. And the corrosive walkers from that day are just one type. Implication is that there are various other types of strange walkers here. Secondly, this place is a community of nuns, part of a larger organization called the Union of Hope. Looking around, the place is filled with a creepy The Nun vibe, but that's because it's a medieval abbey. It even retains its old armory with various weapons to choose from. Whether Sister Isabel is a good person or a bad person is unknown for now, but one thing is for sure, she definitely has a reason for taking Daryl. Back to Daryl. A boy in the distance is mimicking his every move. He then strikes up a conversation, saying he can feel Daryl's sadness from missing home, and encourages him not to despair. The boy's name is Laurent. Strangely, before leaving, Laurent adds, "You deserve a happy ending too." All right, the story now turns to the old man and young girl who betrayed Daryl. A group of fierce-looking soldiers suddenly appears, questioning them about the whereabouts of the previously killed soldiers. As they talk, a disagreement breaks out, and they kill the old man. This scares the girl to tears. To save her own life, the girl obviously can't admit she helped kill the soldier, so she pushes all the blame onto Daryl, that damned American. What's more, one of the soldiers was the younger brother of this hot-headed commander. Back with Daryl, while he's in the abbey, he suddenly hears the roar of a walker nearby. Investigating the sound, he discovers they are keeping a priest walker here. Laurent is even reciting poetry to it. Seeing Daryl freaking out, Isabel has no choice but to reveal her true intentions. Basically, these nuns see the boy Laurent as the chosen one. 3 weeks before Daryl arrived, he drew this picture, successfully predicting Daryl's arrival. To this, Daryl's response is, "We had a classmate like that in elementary school. He was everyone's bullying target." Hilarious. The nun, not giving up, asks Daryl to act as a messenger, to take the boy to the north so he can fulfill his destiny, becoming the Messiah of this apocalypse, meaning the Savior. Of course, Daryl is no fool. He ultimately chooses to leave decisively. As it turns out, just as Daryl steps out the door, a group of uninvited guests arrives at the Abbey. It's the commander of the soldier group from earlier. He barges into the community, determined to find the damned American. At this point, the commander sees the Abbey keeping the priest Walker. For some reason, he insists on executing it. Seeing this, Laurent escapes from a secret room. Now things are really serious. The commander sees the boys unharmed and orders him to be captured and trained as a warrior for his organization. At the critical moment, Daryl appears, throws an axe, and then quickly disappears. With things having reached this point, the nuns can't hold back any longer. They pull out melee weapons to fight against firearms. Fortunately, they have the advantage in numbers, and their opponents are idiots who don't retreat. They manage to take down a few minions. Meanwhile, Daryl is like the Dark Knight, appearing and disappearing to kill enemies, before a final showdown with the commander. Of course, as a villain, the commander won't be killed off so easily. He only takes a shot to the shoulder and manages to escape in the end. Although the enemy was repelled, the Abbey community suffered numerous casualties. It can hardly be called a victory. The final scene of the story is on a ferry. A woman states that it took them 3 years to get this boat running, but their plan was ruined by an American. Absolutely infuriating. From the conversation, we can tell they seem to have been on the boat all along, conducting some kind of experiments on the living and the walkers. And Daryl, as a test subject, escaped midway and destroyed their laboratory. This actually explains why Daryl crossed the sea from America to here. The woman is furious and orders her men to kill this American. The story returns before the outbreak. Sister Isabel, who appeared in the last episode, is in glamorous attire, drinking and partying in a nightclub as usual, and even snorting some white, flour, living life to the fullest. This is a stark contrast to the nun image we see later. One day, as she was preparing to go home, people on the streets began to act unusually. Just as Isabel was about to become this guy's first meal after turning, a man appeared, leading a bewildered Isabel away from the scene. Before leaving the city, Isabel went back home to bring her only relative, her younger sister, with them. Time returns to the present. Daryl, Isabel, Laurent, plus an unnamed nun who was sure to die later, embark on a long journey. As they were walking, the nun suddenly stops, clearly sensing danger. Even worse, the nun screams out of fear, attracting a large crowd of walkers. Seeing this, Daryl uses a gunshot to scare away Laurent's favorite donkey, using it as bait to lead the walkers away. Just then, a whistle is heard in the distance. Daryl immediately gives chase, but he is ambushed by other accomplices who don't play fair. The group of 4 is captured just like that. Next scene, the group arrives at a kindergarten community. As far as the eye can see, it's all punk kids. Even the leader is a teenage girl. Sure enough, when the young leader sees Isabel is a nun and can recite a Bible verse completely, she immediately accepts them. Isabel lies and says Daryl is a missionary from America. When asked why he hasn't learned a single word of French, Isabel replies, "He's American." The young leader hears this and tells her companions to start speaking English as practice, and then everyone only speaks English. Anyway, there are 18 children living in this kindergarten. After the outbreak, none of their parents came to pick them up, so they all survived by relying on each other. Self-sufficient. Also, there used to be a guardian here, who was a mother and teacher to the children. But due to old age and illness, she doesn't have long to live. From the young leader's scripture quiz earlier, we can see this is a community of faith. They still say grace before meals, even now. At this point, Daryl is asked to lead the prayer. Just when you think his missionary cover is about to be blown, he surprisingly says something very sincere. "God, you turn the world into a pile of shit. We must be the most useless, but tonight is different. If you're not happy with tonight, I don't know what will satisfy you." Everyone is moved by his words, and they see Daryl in a new light because of his gentleness. Daryl and the group urgently need a vehicle. It's said there's a castle nearby where a villain lives, hoarding all the surrounding resources, including a pony. So Daryl accepts this side quest, planning to storm the castle the next morning to get the prize. And so it was decided. But before that, everyone gathers in the main hall. One of the kids pedals a bike to generate electricity, playing a classic sitcom starring Robin Williams. And Daryl, still a kid at heart, naturally enjoys it too. But after the entertainment, he quickly falls into deep thought again. It turns out he had just checked on the Guardian's condition. He knows that even with medicine, she can't be saved. But to get the pony and give the kids some hope, Daryl still tells this white lie. The next morning, Laurent, alone and with nothing to do, goes exploring in the wild by himself. But this exploration leads him to see something he shouldn't have seen: the remains of the donkey being torn apart by walkers. Following Isabel's thoughts, the scene flashes back to just after the outbreak began. While the group is fleeing, the younger sister suddenly falls ill and vomits violently. Upon questioning, it's discovered she's pregnant. The man thinks this will eventually slow them down, so he relentlessly gaslights Isabel, telling her to abandon her sister. Isabel seemingly agrees to the plan, but her hand quietly pockets the car keys. Just like that, she abandons her partner and savior.
However, the two sisters are unarmed and can hardly resist a walker attack. With no other choice, she can only seek refuge in an abbey, which later becomes the nun community. Unfortunately, her sister was bitten by a walker on the road earlier. Coupled with the baby being eager to be born, the situation is precarious. The mission to raid the castle officially begins. The young leader mentioned that some time ago, she and two companions tried to storm the castle. Unfortunately, she was the only one who returned alive. However, this medieval castle retains its drawbridge used for defense against enemies. Below, the moat is filled with walkers. It's easy to defend and hard to attack. So the two go to a warehouse to find a way to sneak into the castle. Unexpectedly, as soon as Daryl gets a chance, he locks the young leader in the warehouse just to ensure her safety. Entering the castle, Daryl finds the legendary villain and easily subdues him. Turns out the other person is a fellow countryman, an American. He's a bit crazy and poses no threat at all. Also, Daryl also finds the young leader's supposedly dead companion. Afterward, he wanted to bring the madman back for the young leader to deal with, but the other party tried to resist. They both fall into the moat. The madman, with his hands tied, instantly becomes a free meal for the walkers, dying a horrible death on the spot. Daryl, with his plot armor, wields a small knife in one hand and a flail in the other, handling it with ease. Finally, he shoots and blows up a gas canister. With the young leader and her companion arriving in time to help, the mission is a success. Time to go home. The group returns triumphantly. It should be a joyous occasion, but just as Daryl expected, the Guardian could not be saved and has passed away. With Daryl's encouragement, the young leader officially becomes the leader of the children, and this little episode comes to an end. Sent off by everyone, the group of four continues on their journey. At this moment, Isabel's thoughts once again return to the past. Inside the abbey, her sister ultimately succumbs to the virus. She turns into a walker before giving birth. The nuns have no choice but to cut her open and take the baby from the walker's belly. And the baby miraculously survived. Isabel is heartbroken, holding the new life that was bought with her sister's sacrifice, and names him Laurent. The group of four, having completed their side quest, continues on their journey. They arrive in a small town, planning to meet up with an ally and use a radio. Unexpectedly, this ally, who was originally a musician, has gone mad. He's captured an entire orchestra of walkers to play a symphony, entertaining himself, which is quite creative. Anyway, the group bids farewell to their friend and continues onward. They finally arrive in the city full of pickpockets. Besides the Eiffel Tower, they pass by many famous landmarks along the way. On the contrary, they quickly find this small community of the nuns group. It has 64 members. Although the base is nowhere near the scale of the original groups is, it's still a decent community. They are self-sufficient with food. The best part is that you can see the partially damaged Eiffel Tower in the distance. There's a woman in the community who just became a widow and hasn't eaten or drunk for days. Unexpectedly, after Laurent says a few words to her, the woman opens her heart and no longer hesitates. But right now, Daryl only cares about one thing, and that's using the radio to contact home. But who would have thought that the communication system of this base actually relies on pigeons? Fortunately, the black leader of this community knows his way around. He knows of a place where survivors gather to trade. With just a little currency, he can inquire about ways to return to America. To solve the currency problem, Isabel takes Daryl to her old apartment. After more than 10 years, it's dilapidated inside, and any useful resources have long been looted. However, for the professional party girl Isabel, she actually has many hidden pills and a gold watch from her past life. These things are super valuable trade items in the apocalypse. Daryl then learns about the life of this nun before the apocalypse. As Isabel said, the two of them have something in common. They are both broken people until the world fell into the apocalypse. Indeed. The two then leave the apartment. Unexpectedly, as they open the back door, they see a walker, a child walker, which is extremely rare in the universe. And it looks familiar. In the flashback, before Isabel left the apartment with her sister, she saw a girl who was all alone. Even though she knew the girl's parents had been killed, Isabel didn't take the girl with her. Instead, she told her to go home and wait obediently, which is no different than leaving her to die. Before she could be consumed by regret and grief, a walker upstairs hears the noise and falls from the sky. And it's a corrosive walker. These variant walkers seem to have more vitality than ordinary mindless ones. It didn't even die from the fall. Fortunately, Daryl has seen it all. Not only does he not panic, but uses the walker's corrosive blood to burn away the vines blocking their path, and escapes to safety. So cool. All right, the story turns to the commander from the first episode. Yes, on this side, it's the guy who ran away with his tail between his legs after being beaten by Daryl. The commander, as mentioned before, teams up with the mysterious organization that is likely the CRM to hunt down Daryl. The lab on the woman's ship was previously destroyed by Daryl. They've wanted to capture him for a long time, so they naturally agree to the commander's proposal. Honestly, this development was expected. But the point isn't the commander, but that this organization is experimenting on walkers. Look at this walker. After being injected with something, it first does a little dance, then directly breaks its chains, and then commits suicide by ramming into a wall. Back to Daryl. Under the guidance of the black leader, the group has arrived at the famous Paris catacombs. This catacomb, due to the Black Death and various wars in the past, is now filled with the skeletons of 6 million people. It's a real place. But what's unexpected is that deep within the catacombs, there's a whole other world. It's become a nightclub where survivors gather to party and trade. Without further ado, Daryl starts asking around for information. Just then, an unexpected character appears. It's Isabel's old flame whom she had abandoned. Seeing her savior, we'll just call him Quinn, the scene instantly becomes awkward because Isabel had betrayed him after the apocalypse. But at the same time, in a way, Isabel's sister's death was also caused by Quinn. If he hadn't suggested abandoning the sister back then, and instead the three of them had helped each other, then maybe the sister wouldn't have been bitten by a walker. Just when you thought the situation couldn't get more awkward, Quinn unexpectedly drops an even bigger bombshell. Laurent's father is actually him. Yes, you heard that right. Besides sleeping with the older sister, Quinn also slept with the younger sister, a 2 sisters for the price of 1 kind of deal. Good grief. He then adds that if Daryl wants to get information on how to return to America, he must first tell Laurent who his biological father is. Daryl would rather give up the information to go back to America than be controlled by others, so he directly pulls Isabel away.
Unexpectedly, this action angers Isabel. She says she doesn't need a hero to save her. At this point, Daryl doesn't hold back either. He bluntly says Laurent has the right to know his origins, to know who his biological father is, instead of being molded into Jesus 2.0 all day. Back to the story. This conversation is overheard by Laurent, who was hiding nearby. This causes him to storm off angrily, but at this moment, none of them know that danger has quietly approached. I don't know if Quinn ratted him out or what, but the commander finds him quickly. Without a word, he starts to chase and kill. Daryl immediately uses his superb parkour skills to escape, then turns around for a counterattack, fighting the commander once again. But the other side doesn't play fair. His men open fire, forcing Daryl to flee again. Later, after finally escaping, the roof of the building suddenly collapses. The roof under Daryl's feet gives way, and he accidentally finds himself trapped in a building full of walkers. Coincidentally, Laurent, who had accidentally overheard the truth about his parentage and was angry, also ran to this place alone. Reckless kid behavior is all the same. Seeing that he's about to be eaten by a walker, Laurent doesn't run away. Instead, he preys on the spot. Darwin would be so disappointed. But unexpectedly, the walker is not interested in him. It walks around him instead. This is either a miracle from God, or Laurent has really become Ellie 2.0 with antibodies in his body. Obviously, the latter is more likely. Daryl looks speechless, then escapes the building. As he's walking down the street, he happens to run into the guy in charge of sending messages by pigeon. Seeing him in a hurry, it seems like something happened to the community. Before he can figure out the situation, a military vehicle drives by. A soldier sees the guy's pigeon and wants to take it home for dinner.
The pigeon-loving guy immediately jumps out and blocks the vehicle with his body. Unsurprisingly, he gets killed. Seeing this, Daryl has no choice but to intervene. One knife, one flail, he easily takes out the soldier. Okay, next scene. Daryl arrives at Isabel's apartment. The two are finally reunited. And the most urgent task now is to find the pouting Laurent. It seems he's invincible, wandering the streets alone. He eventually ends up at the Eiffel Tower. Large group of walkers inside the fence smells food being delivered to their doorstep and instantly swarm out. Just then, Daryl arrives on the scene in time and goes on a killing spree. However, just then, a group of people appears out of nowhere. They take advantage of the chaos and kidnap Laurent. No matter how strong Daryl is, he's too late to stop Laurent from being taken by the enemy. Fortunately, Daryl managed to grab 2 minions earlier. One of them becomes Walker Lunch. The other becomes a hostage waiting to be interrogated. The kind-hearted Isabel tries to appeal to emotion, using her status as a nun to persuade him to repent. But it's obvious that the other party will definitely not give in so easily. What's more embarrassing is that this hostage seems to know a lot about Isabel's past and even insults her, calling her a thieving bitch. And the only person who knows about Isabel's past is, obviously, Quinn. So it's a case of a father kidnapping his own son. But what is his purpose in doing this? At this point, Daryl takes matters into his own hands. Daryl takes a small, sharp blade and, without a word, stabs the hostage in the stomach a few times and very skillfully avoids any fatal wounds, making him wish for death. After these few stabs, the hostage immediately drops his arrogant attitude and reveals a secret passage into Quinn's territory. The scene cuts to Quinn. He approaches the female leader of the mysterious organization, saying he has a way to capture Daryl. In exchange, he wants a famous painting. From his conversation with this beautiful young lady, we can tell that he meticulously planned all of this for one purpose only, to use Laurent to get Isabel back by his side. Back to Daryl, the group decides to split into 3 teams to officially launch their operation. First, Isabel is responsible for meeting with the Allied forces to prepare the escape route for later. The remaining Allied warriors will launch a frontal attack on Quinn's catacomb base, creating a diversion so that Daryl can sneak into the enemy camp with the hostage through the secret passage. The poor hostage is seriously injured and has a sprained ankle. He falls to the ground, unable to get up. Seeing that he is no longer useful, Daryl naturally leaves him behind to feed the walkers. Daryl successfully infiltrates the base and rescues Laurent. Then it's time to face the final boss, Daryl versus Quinn in a head-to-head confrontation. Unsurprisingly, Quinn is knocked to the ground in a few moves. So weak. Out of consideration for him being Laurent's father, Daryl doesn't execute him on the spot. Just when you think the team has won a great victory and everyone is happy, unexpectedly, the man in charge of the escape route says that the army has already blocked all the city exits. Basically, there's no way out. At this point, Isabel has no choice but to resort to the classic self-sacrifice trope. She voluntarily returns to Quinn's side, because from the beginning, his only target was Isabel. As long as he gets his love, he will naturally let go of everyone else, including his own flesh and blood. Quite cold-blooded. At the end of the story, Daryl takes on the heavy responsibility, taking Laurent on a journey once again, heading towards the headquarters of the Union of Hope. Along the way, they pass by France's replica of the Statue of Liberty. Daryl's longing for home can't help but well up in his heart. At this point, the scene cuts to a flashback. Daryl is seen wearing his classic jacket, pushing his standard motorcycle, wandering alone in America. A car approaches from a distance. Daryl immediately becomes vigilant, ready to unleash his London street fighting technique of stabbing people. The other person sees that Daryl's motorcycle is out of gas and offers to help. He unexpectedly takes Daryl to a military base. A group of fierce-looking survivors, clearly not good people. Although Daryl himself doesn't look like a good person either. It turns out this group has been gathered here for a mission. The mission is simple. Catch walkers in exchange for gasoline. If you catch a fresh walker that has just turned, you get a double gasoline bonus. The person in charge here has a French accent, obviously from the organization that experiments on the ferry. Next scene. Everyone completes the mission and returns to the base, except for Daryl, who by himself caught enough walkers for a whole team, completely showing them up. The walkers of the other teams are all masked to ensure there are no mistakes. Daryl's are just casually tied with a wooden stick. Simple and crude. A young man who came back empty-handed sees this and immediately strikes up a conversation with Daryl, asking to team up. To this, Daryl responds, "Do I look like I need help?" Returning to the present timeline, under the guide's leadership, the team's journey is smooth. They should be able to reach the Union of Hope headquarters soon, but before that, the group decides to camp for the night in the wild. In their conversation, they talk about the people they miss. Daryl mentions a few familiar names, including Judith and RJ, Connie and King Ezekiel, and Carol. In terms of living people, these are the people closest to Daryl, but he doesn't mention Maggie. No, he can't. The scene cuts to another corner. Isabel, who sacrificed herself, is now under house arrest. And Quinn is like a classic obsessive lover. Although he doesn't use violence and is even very attentive, his words carry a threatening tone. He's determined to get Isabel back to his side. Isabel has a strong personality and naturally won't be captured without a fight. She rips a piece of metal from the furniture with her bare hands and sharpens it into a blade, ready to make a move. Men, when their brains are controlled by their loins, lose the ability to think. They can only be manipulated. But unexpectedly, just as Isabel is about to strike, Quinn recites a story of redemption from the Bible, which stuns her on the spot. Unable to kill a living person, she then considers suicide. It isn't until the housekeeper brings a dish with a hitting note that Isabel regains her composure. From this, it seems that the Union of Hope has planted some spies around Quinn, and it's very likely they have already been secretly acting, preparing to overthrow the hegemony of the mysterious military organization. All right, back to the main group. Daryl passes by Laurent's tent and hears him praying for Judith and the others, which is heartwarming. At night, the guide and Daryl talk about accomplishing a great cause. This group of people firmly believe Laurent is the chosen one, perhaps someone who can change the apocalyptic world. But why is Daryl still so intent on going home? Faced with this question, Daryl's response is simple yet profound. He says that when a person dies in another person's war, it is often only their children who suffer. After a while, no one will even remember what the so-called great cause was. It's clear that Daryl doesn't care about any great achievements. He just wants the children to grow up happily, without experiencing the pain of losing loved ones again. Late at night, we follow Daryl's thoughts back to the flashback at the beginning of the episode. The young man desperately needs gasoline, so he can only endure the humiliation and ask another bully group for help. Daryl sees this, and although he guides him in chopping wood, he still doesn't agree to carry him in catching walkers. After all, right now, he only wants to do one thing: go home. He uses the radio at the military base and successfully contacts his family. Carol! I didn't expect to hear that familiar voice in this show. After confirming they are both safe, Daryl says he's on his way home and they agree to meet in a week. At this point, the radio signal gradually fades, but you can faintly hear Carol say, "Someone came back." Back to the present, a noise is suddenly heard outside the tent. A walker has broken in, and it's a mutated, corrosive walker. The guide, who was on watch duty during the fight, slips and gets impaled on a telephone pole. His death is quite novel. However, facing death, the guide is surprisingly calm. This is because he has God in his heart, and he firmly believes that Daryl is a trustworthy person. The next day, Daryl continues on the road with Laurent. But unexpectedly, the small boat has mysteriously disappeared. One damn thing after another, even the usually calm Daryl can't help but yell. After checking the ropes, Daryl is shocked to realize that the person who let the boat go was actually Laurent. At this moment, all of Daryl's accumulated anxiety and anger erupts. He ends up yelling a bunch of insults at Laurent. Having seen the flashback scene just now, it's not hard to understand why Daryl is so agitated, because the person Carol mentioned is very likely the long-lost Rick. Back to the story, after listening to a barrage of insults, Laurent looks aggrieved and says, "Once we reach our destination, the last person he cares about will also leave. That's why he resorted to this desperate measure." This makes Daryl instantly feel like a bad guy. He can only apologize guiltily. The two then continue on their journey. But they haven't gone far when they hear the sound of an engine behind them. It's clear that the enemy has caught up. Seeing that the situation is not right, Daryl immediately tells Laurent to run away alone, while he stays behind to fight the enemies. Unfortunately, no matter how cool the flail is, Tador has a tough attitude. Without warning, he's about to gouge out Daryl's eyeball. And Daryl, being a tough guy, would rather die than submit. His balls of steel are no joke. Just as Daryl is about to become Gabriel 2.0, Laurent jumps out in time to protect his big brother from harm. On the other hand, Isabelle, having received the note from the Allied forces, not only has 180-degree change in attitude, but also changes into a glamorous outfit, pretending to surrender while waiting for an opportunity to act. She attends a grand event of the military organization with Quinn. But as soon as she enters, Quinn is immediately arrested. It turns out his original girlfriend, feeling neglected, had already tipped them off, telling them about Quinn letting Daryl and the others go. Sigh. Fortunately, Laurent symbolizes the hope of the people, so he probably won't be killed for now. But as for Daryl, it's hard to say. The scene flashes back again. Daryl is preparing to go home when he runs into the bully group returning to the base. And among the walkers they brought back, there's a familiar face. It's the young man from before. Daryl remembers the mission rules. Fresh walkers get double gasoline. A bonus. He instantly understands what happened and punches the bully. And the soldiers had already stated early on that fighting and mating are strictly forbidden in this base. Violators will be severely punished, so Daryl and the bully are taken to the ship we saw earlier. Here, all sorts of strange experiments are being conducted, one of which involves feeding living people to walkers. Fortunately, this small cage is not enough to hold our war god Daryl. He cooperates with the bully to fake an illness, and when the enemy lets down their guard, he goes full John Wick, taking on 3 opponents at once. During the fight, he even has time to retrieve his stolen jacket. The ship is thrown into chaos.
walkers go on a rampage, including this king of walkers. Besides moving quickly, this walker king is also exceptionally ferocious. What's even more impressive is that after Daryl hits it with all his might with a bat, it can still get up immediately, which means it has a lot of health. Back in the present, the grand event officially begins. The female leader gives a passionate speech to the crowd, talking about rebuilding a new France and so on. Interestingly, she mentions in her speech that there are enemies trying to obstruct their grand cause and restore the old system where a few rule over the many.
After the speech, Daryl, as a prisoner, is brought to the center of the stage. Next up is this walker styled after the Silence of the Lambs. Obviously, this is the same type as the Walker King from the ship, and it's even being injected with some kind of drug on the spot. You could call it an enhanced version of the variant Walker. Now the enemy is even kind enough to give Daryl an axe. It doesn't seem like much of a threat. War God versus Walker King. Who will win in the end? The battle begins. Daryl first uses the axe to chop at the Walker King's ankle, slowing its movement speed. Then he buries the axe in its chest. The whole movement is fluid and smooth. Years of combat experience are on full display once again. Unexpectedly, this Walker King not only has enhanced speed and strength, but its blood is also corrosive. Of course, a little strong acid can't kill Daryl. He uses the flag of the New France organization as a weapon and easily takes out the Walker King. Not much damage, but extremely humiliating. But unexpectedly, this is just the beginning. The enemy then brings out Quinn and chains the two together, forcing them to hinder each other. They then release several more Walker Kings. The situation looks grim. Fortunately, the variant Walker modification technology needs some work. Some walkers can't handle the injection and their heads just explode. Some even attack their own kind. Now there are only 2 Walker Kings left. 2 against 2. There's still a chance of winning. By the way, although Quinn is a bit of a jerk, to be able to survive for so long and even become a leader, he must have some skills. He and Daryl cooperate seamlessly and ultimately kill all the walkers. At this point, the boos from the crowd turn into cheers. The audience members are chanting Daryl's name. Now the situation is awkward. Seeing this, Daryl directly throws the walker's head towards the high platform. I strongly suspect the writer is paying homage to Gladiator. At this point, the female leader is furious and directly orders them to be executed by firing squad. That's totally unfair. At the critical moment, a guard suddenly falls to the ground from a gunshot, and the shooter is the black man who appeared earlier, who is also the leader of the Union of Hope community. The note Isabel received earlier must have been a message from the Allied forces calling for everyone to rise up together. The scene is thrown into chaos. The audience quickly disperses and leaves. But things are a bit tricky for Daryl. Quinn, in the previous fight, was accidentally bitten on the back. He wants to amputate, but it's not possible. As a dying man, Quinn begins to regret the terrible things he's done, saying he has let Isabel down. Fortunately, there is a way to atone for his sins right in front of him, that is, to sacrifice his own wrist, so as not to hinder Daryl from saving people. So Daryl doesn't hesitate and chops it off with an axe. Then Quinn, with a roar, charges towards the enemies who heard the noise. On the other hand, Isabel and Laurent are ordered to be locked in a cell. During the process, Laurent suddenly goes berserk and tries to escape. Although he fails, it allows Isabel, with her maxed-out pickpocketing skills, to snatch the keys from the guard and eventually escape to meet up with Daryl. But they're separated by an iron gate. Just as they're about to use a tool to pry open the lock, a walker slowly walks out. It's the reanimated Quinn. For the sake of the plot, Isabel suddenly turns into a damsel in distress, unable to handle even one walker. This forces Laurent to kill for the first time, and he kills his own biological father.
Just like Carl killed Walker, Laurie is a similar kind of poetic justice. I guess this is a necessary part of growing up for a brat in the apocalypse. The crisis is finally over. There's only a short distance left, and they will be able to deliver Laurent to the headquarters of the Union of Hope, a place called the Nest. On the road, the group stops the car to fix the engine. He talks about his childhood environment. Longtime viewers will know that he and his brother were long abused by their father. But what we've never heard before is that Daryl's grandfather was also a man who abandoned his wife and children. This was because during World War II, his grandfather chose to enlist, but he died in battle soon after. This enlistment might seem great and selfless to the outside world, but it had a huge impact on Daryl's father. No wonder Daryl said in the last episode that when a person dies in another person's war, it is often only their children who suffer. It turns out, this wasn't just referring to his companions, but his own personal experience. Daryl even thinks that his father's absence is a vicious cycle. That's why his father ultimately became the man he was. At this point, Isabel changes the subject, admitting that the so-called prophecy drawing she showed Daryl was actually fake. After going through so much together, Daryl no longer cares about these things. The atmosphere is strangely warm-hearted. Nothing bad will happen, right? At this moment, the commander and his soldiers appear. First, he takes a hostage, then he takes Daryl hostage. Now, even the strongest war god is powerless to resist. Look, when Isabel tries to resist, she gets stabbed. Just as the head-bashing incident is about to be repeated, the commander, who hates Daryl to the bone, unexpectedly kills all his soldiers and lets the team go. He throws out the line, "We'll fight again next time." The group continues on their journey and finally arrives at the legendary nest. It turns out this is the famous Mont Saint-Michel Abbey in France. It's a real place. The group receives a warm welcome. The delivery mission is officially over. Here, Isabel's stab wound is properly treated. Laurent makes friends with the other children. By the way, shortly after the show aired, many viewers were very concerned about whether Daryl and Isabel would become a couple. Here, the writer gives an answer. First, the two of them don't miss any opportunity for eye flirting. Then Isabel even lets Daryl clean the wound on her shoulder. The interaction is intimate, but it stops there. There's no further development. Probably out of consideration for Connie fans. All right, back to the commander. Returning empty-handed, he is questioned by the female leader. An entire group of soldiers was wiped out, yet he is unharmed. Doesn't that seem unreasonable? Faced with the accusation, the commander drops the act. It turns out the reason he let the team go was mainly because he was unwilling to kill a child. It seems that as a former soldier, he still has some principles. But since you've betrayed the organization, why did you come back? The poor commander is thrown into the dungeon. You don't need to be a genius to know that he will be severely tortured and forced to reveal the location of the nest. Right now, Daryl is unaware of the impending crisis. He is preparing to retire with honor. The leader of the Union of Hope keeps his promise and arranges a boat for him to return to America. He can leave the next morning, but that also means he will abandon Isabel and Laurent. Daryl has never been one to choose romance over friendship. The only conflict point is Laurent, because the child will once again lose his so-called father figure. After thinking for 3 seconds, he ultimately chooses to return to America. After all, the bond with his group back there is over a decade old. It's not something he can just let go of. He crosses mountains and ridges and eventually passes by a cemetery. It's the famous Normandy American Cemetery. One of the tombstones has Daryl's grandfather's name on it. I have to say, the director shot this scene beautifully and tragically. It makes even the tough guy Daryl shed a tear. Afterward, he swings his flail, kills a few walkers, and arrives at the shore. Just as he is about to get on the boat to leave, he hears Laurent's voice from behind. The darn kid actually followed him all the way here. At this point, I'm not even sure if this is reality or a hallucination. Will Daryl ultimately choose to leave or stay? At the end of the story, welcome to America. Daryl's standard motorcycle is on the road, but the rider is this man. A car behind him keeps getting closer, and after taking a shot, he is forced to stop. At this point, the person in the car slowly opens the door and gets out. It's the master warrior, Carol. Carol is chasing this man, obviously to get information about Daryl. To think that Carol, looking like a housewife, would actually commit a robbery, hilarious. We see Carol use her long unseen skill of hiding a weapon up her sleeve and knocks the man unconscious. She puts him in the trunk.
After getting the clue about the motorcycle's origin, Carol decisively closes the trunk, saying she'll come back to let him out after confirming the information. Finally, she leaves coolly. And this episode ends just like that.